After all of that, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'll never get the permissions set right. Actually, setting permissions in Linux is pretty easy once you know how. Let's do a little bit of setup work before we start actually working on permissions. Let's make sure it's there, and let's look at the permissions. I thought that with the directory, they were given full permission. In other words, read, write, and execute on all three groups: the user, the group, and the other. Oh, wait a minute, we had that UMask that comes into play. Let's see what the UMask actually is set for. 0002. So that means that the other group will not get the right permission. Remember, your UMask subtracts from that particular entity. So that means that rather than getting all of the assigned permissions, we get read, write, execute, read, write, execute, read, and execute on a directory. And that's why it ended up like it did. Notice the D at the very beginning. That indicates it's a directory. You see on the files, it doesn't have a letter. It's just got the dash. Now let's create a file underneath that expenses directory. Let's use the touch command. Create a file called Julie. Now let's do the list for expenses Julie and see what the permissions are on that file. So in this case, we have read, write, and read only. Remember, the default permissions for a file would be read, write, read, write. But because of the UMask, we have the 002, so that takes away the write permission from the other category. Now we know what the permissions are by default. So let's make a couple of changes. Let's work with the options or the letter commands. So let's do a change mod, and we're going to change the folder. So let's use the U, meaning the user. We're going to make sure that they have read, write, and execute, comma, and no space. The group, we're going to add write to it, comma, and no space. And then other, we're also going to add write. Okay, now let's do the check and see what we've got now. So now we've got full permission, all the rights that could be on that directory. Now let's change it back to where it was. Oops, typo, expenses. And we find expenses, and we're back to where we were before with the read, write, execute, read, execute, and read, execute. Let's change the permissions on the Julie file. I'm going to change to that folder so we don't have so much to type. And we see the only file that's in there is Julie. Let's look at our long list so we get our permissions. Okay, so now we're going to do change mod, and we're going to put U plus execute, G plus execute, O plus write and execute on the Julie file. And now you notice it does have full permission across all of the categories. Now let's change it back. Don't you love that up arrow? Saves so much typing time. And it's back the way it was before. Now we're going to work a little bit with the numbers. Remember that the 777 is the same thing as read, write, execute, read, write, execute, read, write, execute, because the value of the first bit is 4, the second bit is 2, and the first bit is 1. So 4 and 2 and 1 is 7. So let's use the numbers to change permissions on the file. That's a lot easier to type. And now we've got full permissions again. So let's go back and change it to 775. Let's see what that looks like. So you notice that the only change that made was in the other category, and it took away the write permission. 4 for the read, 0 for the write, and 1 for the execute. So see, it's really not that difficult. You just figure out what you're going to make the assignment for, and then you use those numbers and add them up. We've got one more thing to talk about now, and that's the special permissions. You can add permission for the SUID, which is the user, the GUID, which is for the group, or the other category gets what's called a sticky bit. If you add a 4 in the first octet, so we have to decide, are we going to add that permission to the SUID and the GUID and add the sticky bit? That would give you a 7. The values were 4, 2, and 1. If you're only going to give it to the SUID, then that would be 4, and say the sticky bit, that would be 1. So you would put a 5 in front of the other permissions. So let's just say we're going to set it for 5 on this particular file. So it'll be 75775. Oop, forgot to put the file name. Now look, we have something a little bit different. We've never seen the S and the T before. That S indicates that you have set the special permission on the SUID. What that means is it makes the user that's executing a command the owner of that file only while it's executing the command. If we had set it on the SUID, then it would make the user that's executing the file a member of the group that owns that file. With the sticky bit, that one has a little different functionality than the other two. It's really meant more for like a folder called expenses, where people are going to put their expense reports. You want them to be able to add to the directory, but you don't want them to be able to remove anything from it. Note also that the sticky bit has to be working with the execute command. If the category does not have the execute command, then there's really no function on the sticky bit. It does no good. And if that's the case, it will not show up as the lowercase letters like it does here. It'll end up as a capital letter. So you see, it's not really that difficult to set permissions in Linux.